I'm at the Museum of Country Life at Barrach, County Mayo, and I'm holding a heather lobster pot made by Michael O'Malley from Inishturk in County Mayo. We can see that the base of this pot is finished like a donkey creel, where some of the uprights form a warp, over and under which the other uprights are woven. This heather pot is from Achill, further north on the Mayo coast, made by Richard Walsh in 1947. The base is more like a dome, with the pot narrowing gradually towards its closing point, with new strong woody pieces of heather finishing it off. Here I'm in the storage area of the museum, and this is another heather lobster pot from Achill. It is similar to the other heather lobster pot from Achill that we looked at. I'm going to show the making of a heather lobster pot. These were used in the northwest coast of Mayo, where willow wasn't very widespread. So this is a stand of ordinary heather, what some people call ling, Calluna vulgaris and Asquelga Fliuch Mór. This is the sort of stand we're looking for, growing on a bank. So it's growing outwards like this, so you have long pieces that are clean. This is exceptional. You're not usually going to get them that good, but this piece here that's in my hand, this large piece, that's really too coarse to have anything to do with the pot. And the first one I made was from slightly material that was as coarse as this, and it was very rough for that reason. So along here you can see there are some pieces obviously going to be larger than others, some pieces narrower. Those would make good weaving pieces, but you don't have to be as particular for weaving pieces so long as they're thin. They can be quite short pieces, but for your uprights it's nice to get long lengths like that. So this was traditionally harvested when it was in flower. I presume that is because it's slightly more flexible at that time, but also it helps you to distinguish between it and the bell heather here beside it. And the problem with the bell heather is that sometimes it can grow quite large, but it's not nearly as flexible. So at least when it's in flower, you can actually very easily tell the two apart. So I have sorted my heather and I've picked out the cleanest, longest pieces for the uprights. So these are probably the best that I harvested, and I'll probably use these as the first group of 13 for the uprights, and then some supplementary uprights will be needed, another 13, and I probably have altogether about 40 pieces of heather there that I think will suit for uprights. Shen gweilga tarhu shen na sotion agus gachi tukter aslachi orhu homai. Now over here I have a slightly thinner, less perfect heather, and this little group I've sorted some of the thinnest pieces because the initial weaving I really appreciate having nice slender pieces of heather. All of this heather has been harvested about 8 days ago, and I have steamed it, which is not traditional, but there's a reason for that. I also use heather for making nests occasionally, and I have found that the steaming improves the working quality. So in here in the steamer I have some other weavers. I've taken the weights off this, and if you own a steam box, it's obviously not something you have to do, and as I said, traditionally it wouldn't have been done, but if you do own a steamer, it's quite a good idea, I think, to improve the working quality of your heather in this way. So inside here are pieces of thin heather as well that I intend to use also for the siding of the pot. And I think the steam has improved the working quality somewhat. Okay, so here I have an 8-inch or 20 centimetre plant pot, and I went out to a grass place and cut what we call a scraw, soil with grass on top of it, and rammed it into the pot. That means there's a lot more structure. I know that there doesn't seem to be much grass there, but it just got torn away a bit. But there's a lot more structure. Loose soil wouldn't have enough grip, so you need to do it that way. And now my next thing will be to put a 5-inch circle here, and then I can insert the uprights. So here is my 5-inch circle, and I've already put white chalk marks. So I'm going to make holes with my bodkin for the uprights and begin to set them in that way. Okay, so I've put in a hole here, and then we'll insert the upright and go around there. And I mean, obviously it's just approximate, but I found it useful to put the chalk marks on the steel because it gives me a rough idea where I'm making the holes. And that which seems straight when you go to put it in, well, it's not going to be all that straight, but it's that kind of material. It's a bit too much to expect them to be very straight, and a part of the nature of the material to be a little wavy. So I have pointed these already, and you can see there are some root hairs in that particular piece of heather, and that is because sometimes it grows sideways along the ground, especially if you get an old stand of heather. So that is 13 uprights in all. And now I can remove this. And it's probably a very useful thing to gather your uprights slightly so that the neck won't be sloping out too much. So I'm going to put a little hoop on them. Okay, so I'm going to put a hoop, gather these and just put them into a hoop. If they would have done anything traditionally, it would have been a tie, and that might be fine. But see, it clumps things up perhaps a little bit more than you want. So it's just something loose like that to hold them in position. And now we can begin to weave. So now I'm going to begin weaving by inserting my first weaver like this. And notice how my weaving material to begin with is quite thin. I'm a little bit disappointed in my soil. It's not gripping as well as I'd like, but hopefully it will be okay. I've used this for one pot already, and it's probably loosened the structure a little bit. So the weave is simply pairing weave in and back out. In some cultures it's called twining, but we always use the word pairing. So you can see how they're crossing across each other. So on this first row, I'm going to have to force the uprights, and weavers catch a little bit because of course there are pieces in the uprights as well. And that's why you can't use a piece of wood usually to begin this, because you wouldn't be too confident that the uprights would pull cleanly out of it again. Where you have pieces like this, you can of course do this, you can hook them in like that together a little bit so that they'll weave a little bit more easily. So this is separate your uprights, and so far these weavers are working a little bit better than I would have expected. So this one now, you can see that upright has migrated. It's almost as if it was in loose soil. So the structure of the soil in my pot isn't quite what it might be. As I said, I did use it to make one pot already, and it seems to have loosened the soil fibres. But if you can get it past your first round, thereafter it won't matter. So I have two separate uprights there now, so I have to lever that one. It's gone out of its hoop for a moment, but don't have to worry about that just yet. So my upright is beginning to get thin, so it's time to incorporate a new piece. So this is probably the period where you want your finest material. And so I'm just going to hook that together a little bit to make a weaver, and have a nice clean weaver on this side as well. So we'll see how we go. So to make the join, lift up slightly and piece in underneath like that, and then work it to there, then step over the material but you see, I think that rod has broken. Yeah, so we'll try again. We will give it another chance, and don't be too disheartened if this happens with heather, because it's in the nature of the material. It isn't as flexible, so it's not your fault or anything like that. It's just difficult material. And then incorporate the piece. So I'll weave the both together for a little while, and you see we're coming to the point where I began, this weaver. So when that time comes, that we will stay below it, so won't be any broken pieces. So I'm actually going to get one more piece out of that if I can, the older one. And then this is my opening weaver there. So I'm going to go under it with this weave, and then I'll probably sort out my uprights a little bit again. So possibly I should have gone and got a new piece of soil for that, but it's probably no harm to see also that you can improvise even if they do move around in the soil. Okay, so then we're catching that, and the other weaver should be here. Maybe we've caught it already. Just want to make sure we have no weaver left behind. No. Okay, so I'm going to make a join. So this piece is getting thin, so I'm going to supplement it. And you can join as frequently as you like. Aha, that was the piece I was looking for, a piece of the other weaver. So I want to make sure that I'm under both of those, like that. So that there's nothing loose, and then this will be joined like so. So this is kind of the same way as you would make the join with willow lobster pot. So it's a little bit of lobster pot weave, you know, both one following the other. And even though that's quite scraggly material, it's actually worth, at least in this case, bringing it on, because this stuff will dry hard. That's foliage, but there's still a lot of strength in that material, and it'll dry very hard, and it'll actually allow me to put more pressure on there, because that stuff almost never breaks. So it's quite important to incorporate a little bit of that in if you can. Now that I'd call spent. There's very little left in it. And we are back weaving. And I thought I would probably retie that, but actually they're weaving not so badly now. Now, one piece broke there, but the other piece seems to have remained intact, but I'll supplement it with something small, just to be on the safe side. So if something breaks, you can go back for it, or you could also supplement what's there, so that you have two elements. Because even if it's cracked slightly, there's still a good hole in it. So I'm going to join this piece now, and you'll appreciate that thin, fine material is really so important at this point in the weaving. You can incorporate much rougher material later in the body of the pot if you need to, but certainly for the neck and for the early parts of weaving, because the spaces are so tight, it's really difficult if your material is too coarse. So I can get, you see, that's actually still good material. So I'm going to incorporate that in as well. Now it can be a little bit hard to see here, but if you look, you have two distinct. So this is what's coming out of here. At most one more piece out of it, so I think I'll probably join that as well now. And again, looking for a nice, fairly fine piece. So I just can show it. I guess you can show my show. So for the joins, I do lobster pot weave, where I incorporate the new rod first, and then the second rod, or second piece, weaver, I suppose I should say, follows it. So here is my weaver here. And if you need to, once you've woven a piece, and if this is obscure in your view, then by all means cut it away. And if in that you find a piece that still has a bit of strong material, you can weave it in, like so. So it's probably quite a good idea to trim away occasionally so you see what you're at. So again, this material is getting quite fine, so I'm going to put in a new piece. Again, the join. And the piece that remains can also be woven. So we weave onwards like that until we have about 5 or 6 rows of weaving in the neck. And if it's sloping out too much, if you notice this one is sloping out a bit, so you can either try to push it in as you weave, or maybe tie that up at some point. Okay, so if you find that your uprights are listing to one side, as is happening here, you can try to push them and especially weave into them, push as you weave. But you could also, if it was serious, you could actually tie that. But because of the difficulty of weaving with this material, the tie is also a bit of a constraint. You know, it makes it a bit harder to weave. So I'm coming close to where I'll finish the neck. That's about there. I think I'll have 5 rows of weaving throughout. One other thing, I've actually put on a pair of gloves because this material can be quite severe. So I've got a nick or two from the heather. You don't have quite as good a feel with the gloves, but if your hands aren't hard or, you know, reasonably tough, you might find that you'd have to put on a fairly nice light or tight fitting pair of gloves. So I am going to go to about here, and then I'm going to say that is the neck made. Samar de tíotanisig críochnuan Barrach tá cahar na cúigró bheith cúigró agan go dtí seo agus chuirmuid isteach asnaí brise an sin. Agus tá tar éis mitógaí a chur orm héin mar tá fríoch beagán géir ar na láhaí agus tá mhór sin scatí úsáidim mitógaí. A piece of my yin. I left a piece behind me. So I'd say that's tall enough now. So our next thing now will be to put in extra by stakes. There's 13 stakes there, and by the time we put in the extra stakes, we should have about 26. So I have selected 13 uprights here now to put in as by stakes, extra stakes. And if you have a piece like this that's fort, you'd usually work the two together like that so that it can become one upright. You can always separate them a little bit later on. If you need an extra stake, it can be helpful and you can then supplement that again. But for now, if the uprights are too branched at this moment, the weaving will be inclined to catch. I would usually use my bodkin and my pot of grease and try to make a space down beside this. You might find that one side is a little bit more amenable than the other side. So let's begin here. And you want to make sure that you don't damage the structure too much, or especially that you don't go out into the neck of the pot. So I have already put a point on this. I'd like to have a little bit more grip than that if I could. It's gone down a bit more there now. And I'll go all the way around, adding a stake like so. So the next one will supplement this, and so forth. So now we're going to lift it off the table and spread it out on the floor and to begin the weaving. Okay, so now I have put the pot on the floor, no longer need the table, and the next part of this will be to ease these outwards like that, and I will stand over the pot and begin to weave. So first of all, I'll draw them out a little bit. And you could support them with one hand as you go. Oh, there's a broken one, and I think it's a true one as opposed to one I inserted. If it was one I had inserted, I'd probably just put in a different one. But yeah, it's there from the beginning. But that's not too much of a crisis, because we can always supplement it with something else and support it.
when the time comes. Okay. So I think I'm actually going to put in a thin supplementary one to that, so that it will support that upright, and then I can begin to weave. Okay, so this upright has broken fairly cleanly, but as I said, because it's from the very beginning, I was happy to just put a rod beside it. On the other hand, if it was completely broken, you could argue that you could just cut it and put in a new rod. But for now, I'm going to see if it will work like that. Do you know, I think that damage is so great that it might be just as easy. There's so little connection left that I think it might be just as easy to cut it and replace with another rod. So that's what I'll do. It's sometimes good that things like this happen, because I suppose it shows that it's no crisis. But the rod I was going to support it with was very narrow, so I'm now going to put in something a bit more substantial. And that's okay on the inside, yeah. So now I can begin to weave. So I have selected here some thin material, which I hope will weave relatively easily. It may not, but one of the things about weaving with heather is not to expect it to be, you know, very flexible. An occasional break is fine. We can replace rods fairly frequently if we need to. So I'm going to put this on the floor beside me, crouch over the pot and begin to weave. So I lay this on the floor and I'm going to get a needler. And kneel down and start opposite here. Okay, so I'm going to do a pairing weave like we've done on the neck, and I'll begin with one butt there and one butt there and begin the weave. So left goes in where right comes out. That's the end of my old weaving there that I'm catching in on. So sometimes it can be hard to sort out what is weaver and what is upright. So I thought that was a piece of weaver, but it's actually a piece of upright. And spread these as best you can. Now that rod cracked, I heard it, I don't see it, but I can feel it, so I probably will put in a little supplementary rod as well. Just so that there's structure in what we're making. And don't be too put out, as I said, about rods breaking, because that's heather after all. So sometimes it's possible to rotate the pot, and otherwise you rotate yourself. So the left hand element going in, and back out. So that's also a pair to be broken up there. But this particular weaver is quite knotted up, yeah. So this weaver next, as there's a little piece of that weaver left still, so I'll take that along as well. So this one next, and we're having the spaces fairly close to the neck, not more than a finger wide if possible. And each time we come to a pair like this, we divide it, you know, so that we have two separate stakes. So after the end of this row of weavers, we will be hoping to have 26 stakes. And we're going to work up then, putting in a few more additional stakes to have a number close to 40. It can be high 30s or low 40s, but that's roughly what we're looking for. If you had very thick uprights, you could do with perhaps some less. So at this stage, I'm quite glad to have some of this material, as well as supplementing with a new thin piece. That's a little bit too thick actually, that particular piece I picked up. But this material is very unlikely to break where it comes close to the foliage part. So that tends to mean you can put on quite a bit of pressure, and it helps you to straighten uprights or press them. This material is a little bit more brittle, the whole rod. Okay, try and move on. So I put in the new piece of weaving first, and then I come back for this last old piece. And then that's finished with. We've come back to where we began. So we'll be opening out again, going on another row, but keeping the space only a finger width. Now, later we have to add bi-stakes, and sometimes you get a situation like that where there's a natural branch in a piece, so you could, for instance, put one on one side and one on the other. They're still forked, that's where they're joined, so next row I'll probably use those two as an opportunity to add an extra upright. So at the moment we have 26 uprights, 2 13s, and we need to bring that number up by at least 10 and maybe 14 more. So wherever we see there's a kind of a wide spot, so we might think we'll start adding an upright after this row. I'd like to have 2 rows before I'd even consider adding uprights. Okay, so I have 2 rows of weaving completed, and I'm approximately a foot or 30 centimeters wide, maybe a little less, but I want to incorporate my bi-stakes, extra stakes now, and so that will be the next thing I'll do, pick those out. So I'm going to start inserting some extra uprights, and this is very much based on your eye. For instance, you might see there's an opening that seems a little wide, and this one is a little wide. So you might say, okay, that space would take another upright, for instance. So you put in your bodkin there. Make sure that you grip it in at least 2 rows of weaving with your slipe facing downwards. Okay, so that's gripped in 2, and it'll be in another row of weaving as well, so that should be fine. This one is quite weak, but we'll supplement that in due course. But I think it would also take another upright here. You see that space is kind of wide. So we'll go around the pot in that way. There's no need to record all of them, but we can go around the pot and decide where would benefit from an extra stake. And then next round we will fan those out so that we have a reasonably even distribution.
So we have roughly 40 uprights altogether now, and we are going to continue weaving the top of the pot, but I don't want it to be more than about 15 inches wide in total before gathering it up and making sure that we begin the sides. So tá Barrach a potta diantaí an seo, agus anis tá muid An Baithis, agus tána fíochán breise cotíosteach, so hart gás scóir lí cotíosteach anis agan, agus ní lána anis ach coineála fíochán, An fíochán, agus An Jarafií go mai na slataí úr seo lí tarantíosteach sa nobar. Space is very tight here, so I know that whole pieces of heather would be more likely to break, so I'm quite happy to make a kind of a sugan-like rope of these fine pieces and work them into the spaces, because they're much more likely to weave without breaking, just for this little section. And I can get a bit of the tension that I need. So again, normally I would be very keen to join that, and I probably will join it with something thin, but I'm also quite happy to have the foliage piece, this piece, so that I wind that together and it'll give me a nice tension in the weave. So the rod to join first, and space is so tight I even have difficulty getting that in. So in tight spaces like that, the heather is more likely to break, so you're putting a lot more strain on the weaver, but that one held, which is great to see. But I'll still take a little piece of this along as well. Okay, so I need a new piece there as well. So because of the introduction of the bi-stakes, I'm looking for particularly thin pieces just for this first row. So we have come to the point where every bi-stake is separated. So every upright or stake is gathered together in that round of weaving. So now I think I should be able to remove it from the pot and place it on the floor.
Next time I'm going to toast the ground go. I'm going to trim that now and clean it around, and then I'll gather up the uprights. I'll clean these as well now while I'm at it. My suspicion is that these would have been trimmed with a knife in an upward motion. Maybe I should show that. Traditionally, they would have been cut with a knife upwards like that. But I have to admit, a secateurs is probably more convenient for that. So now I'm going to curve these uprights to take some of the resistance out of them. So I'll take each in turn, just flex them like that. Okay, I think I'll just double check that I did that one. Okay, yeah. So now I'm going to try to gather the uprights together, but because they're so short, that's going to be quite challenging. So the first thing we want to do is put some sort of a weight there to stabilize it. And maybe if we can find a few fairly long rods from one side and long uprights from the other side, that will give us at least something to tie and gather into. So rather than being overly ambitious and try to gather a load together, I'm quite happy to tie a small grouping first. Even that can be challenging enough. Okay. So missed one there, but anyway. Next thing we'll try to gather some from, that's north-south, so now we'll try to gather 2 or 3 from east and from west. We're not even worried about shape or anything at this point, just essentially gather them up first, because I have some hoops that I intend to use. But traditionally, as I understand it, this would have been simply done with tying and pressure of the knees to help the shape. So get a little wire now. So now it's a question of using the ties that exist already and hooking in some more material in this way. And again. And now we'll see if we can place a hoop. That one's probably a little bit too big. Well, I'll leave it there temporarily till I find the next size down. I'll probably actually put 2 of that size first, because it means if things slip, that should hold it. And now I'll get something a bit smaller. I wouldn't be able to weave with those ties in place. I wouldn't have enough freedom, so that's why I'm keen to get that hoop is too large. The 2 hoops about the same size is often a very stable way to hold something. So now I will probably let go my ties and allow it to spring out into the hoop. So now I can take out the heavy weight and lock the pot on its side and begin to weave in that direction. So now we are beginning the sides of the pot, or the shoulder as some people call it, and incorporating all of these uprights as we go. So again, space is still quite tight, so we're still focusing on having fairly slight material for now. And if you have a lot of foliage or branches like that, you can twirl them a little bit to make a kind of a sugan rope out of it. And if we're going to have light uprights, we'll be able to supplement that as we go. So that upright has cracked slightly. You can see. So I'm going to put a bit of extra material there so it'll be caught. I'll probably find what I'm looking for here. Quite a short piece with a lot of foliage. And make a little rope of that, and that will definitely secure it. Sometimes it can be difficult to see your in and your out space. So tá muid deanú fíochán is le fríoch sá cuil an is go muid an anna golas teach sna spásan is seo, agus tá muid tosaíon is an Clár putta, agus tá Baithis agus a Barrach diantaí, agus inis tá muid tosaíthe na tíhaine, agus sinna thugtar a píosa seoga an Clár. So now we're started into the shoulders of the pot, as it was called, and Clár as Gaeilge, and we're still using quite light material because the spaces are, this space is fairly broad, but in general the spaces are still quite tight. So it's nice to have fairly fine material, but once we're up on the sides, we'll be able to use slightly thicker material once we've helped to form it. And you can also use your knees
like that to help shape the pot. I think this is not traditional, of course, so they would have used their knees a lot, but anything that helps, I'm inclined to do. So no more than the fact that steaming the heather wasn't traditional, but makes it that little bit more flexible. So therefore, I'm quite happy to adopt any practice that makes the work more easy to do. I'm trying to separate these now because it'll suit me to treat that as one upright and that as another. I'm at about 40 uprights, but sometimes you might say, well, this space is a little wide if I don't have two uprights there, so it's advantageous to have one. So that'll be an upright, and this will be the other. So now that I've incorporated all of these into the shoulder, as it's called, this section, at least once, it's just a question of moving up the sides, tightening a little bit as we go so that there isn't too much outflow. So there's nothing new about what's happening, but here I have a thin upright. So if I meet a situation like that, I would usually incorporate a new piece, work it into the hoop first, and then feed it in. And you don't have to worry if it doesn't catch in much, so long as it's caught a little piece, and then you can incorporate it into the weaving like that. And in that way, you've strengthened your upright and so forth. So I'll weave up to about here, tightening as I go, and I'll probably even replace this hoop with something a bit smaller so that it will help me to bring it in a little bit, and I'll bring it up towards about that height. So we've built up the body of the pot now, and it's time to think of narrowing in. So already I've brought one or two that were individuals together to make a twosome, but the only way you will narrow is to allow, say, a place like this to allow two to become one, and that will allow you to push in more. So that's kind of what's beginning to happen now, because our eventual height is somewhere about here. So for instance, here's a place where you have two individuals, and now they will become a one, and that will allow you then to press inwards more like that and not be taking up as much room. If you insist on them all being individuals, the sides are more inclined to be straight. So now I'm going to put it on the ground again and continue to weave. So this is a two that will become one. So, and you'll notice that the hoop that I was using to help me to shape the pot is now gone. I've taken it away. There's enough material here of use to bring that along as well. And I'll leave that foliage there. And then that can get trapped there to be woven the next time. So one here as well. In there. And then that two have become one. And you could do that. You probably would aim not to do it with two consecutive ones immediately. So I'll probably bring this one, separate it. Oh, that's sipped out. So bit by bit, our pot will become narrower as we gather in that manner. So, and at this stage as well, I'm using the knees to help me to draw in the shape of the pot like that. So as well as occasionally doubling up uprights, I'm also using my knees to pull the shape of the pot inward. So as you go up, you'll also notice that some of the original stakes have got really too short. That hasn't the vitality or the strength to go the whole way. So I spoke about it that we would have to occasionally supplement your uprights. So you can point that and maybe use a bodkin. See, because that is way too short. And try to make sure that you hook in a reasonable depth down. So that's hooked in 2 rows of weaving there, so that will be fine, and then that will take over from that and will be enough for finishing. So you do that according as you'd see the need. It's not that complex really, because if it's not long enough to go all the way to the top, it either has to be supplemented or be allowed to join with another upright. So I've put a chalk mark here at roughly the height where I want to finish. I've reached the desired height there now, which is about 15 inches, about 14 inches. The base will add another inch to it. So I'm going to try to taper my weaving so that the space will get a little bit less, so that I will be level at this point. So from now on, I will try to be closing my space more and more and pressing down the rows as I go. That will be sometimes a little difficult, because sometimes you'll find the weaving won't go down even if you do want it to. You know, it'll press down a certain amount, and it depends on the thickness of what you're weaving with. But in general, I'm going to try to level off so that when I reach this point, I'll stop weaving. So here is our chalk mark. So I probably won't add any more material, and just weave this one through there. As it happens, that twig is breaking there. So I may decide that I don't need it. I think I've probably reached enough, yeah. And I might try to twist that and incorporate. Well, I'll give it a twist now and see if it will. Sometimes something will still weave even though it is cracked. So I think that's okay. And I think I've reached enough height. I'll put it up on a table now and just have a quick look at it. It doesn't need to be super level or anything like that. So I'm just going to put it up on a stool so that I get a rough idea of whether it's reasonably level and correct height, or if I spot anything that needs seeing to. But as I said, it's not by any means something you have to worry about the perfection of it. So I think it's roughly even. If it were willow, I'd fuss a lot more about it being level, but I think in this situation that's good enough. So I'm going to trim off surplus stuff now so that I have a clearer view. I don't want, as it is, the base will be a bit of a jumble, so I clear away all stuff that I don't need. And it may take a few months before that foliage stuff dries sufficiently to fall away. So when you come to this point,
The first thing is to look into your pot and see if there's anything that needs trimming on the inside, because you won't get another opportunity to do so. It can be a bit difficult to see in with all the heather protruding. I've just a little bit of trimming of a few branches in here to do. So I'm just going to open it out there, and I can't see much that needs doing. Maybe just a tiny little bit of trimming on the inside, but generally it's okay. But if you do have trimming to do, now is the time. So our next thing then is to decide what is going to be, what we're going to weave against. So I'm going to, I've decided that these are going to be knocked down to intertwine with a group of, it can be roughly 4. That's a kind of a strong one, so that'll go on its own. This one and that one might go together. These two might go together, and this one. It's essentially to get 4 knocked in one direction and roughly opposite 4 on the other side. If any of these, so this is perfectly long enough to reach the other side comfortably, but if any of these need supplementing, now you can do it quite easily by getting your bodkin and pointing a piece of heather and sticking it in so that you'll have a longer piece. So I'll have to do that with a few of these now. So this group here are a little bit short to reach the other side, so we'll need a bit of supplementing. So I can put it into either of those. So I'll grease up and see if I can get my bodkin in fairly easily. I've pointed this with my knife, so that's gone in fairly comfortably. If it'll reach another, that's fine. So then that group can be knocked. So let's have a look at this. That's a little bit short as well, so we'll supplement that in the same way. That'll make that long enough. And this group is also a little bit short, and also we might remove some of that. You see that there isn't much, that's mostly foliage, which isn't of great benefit to us. We'll keep anything that has kind of structure, but that is only going to be bulky. So again, that will, and that's still more foliage there. And then we'll supplement that with a piece, which I've pointed again with the knife. And that's my marker, just so that I remember where I'm at. These don't have to go down terribly deep, just so long as they get a decent grip. So that will now cross across. So I have to do the same on the other side. So this is my opening one here. That's probably long enough to reach. I'll just thread it a little bit. That'll give me a clearer idea of what it's able to do. So I could lose some of that foliage, for instance. Okay. So we'll pull these out of our way. So these will interlink. and wheel that around so you'll see it a bit better, and maybe put down my knee here. So we want these to interlink. So since this is the longer, I'll catch this. I put it in there, over and under. Okay, and pull the two together. I'm not getting that great movement, but I think I'll manage. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not fully happy with that, so I'm going to just see if I can't thread this one a little bit more. Yeah, lose that piece of foliage there. And if you go back to the ones that we saw at the museum, there were two styles of finishing. One, kind of a tall, pointed pot from the North Mayo region, and the one that Michael O'Malley made, which was a bit more reminiscent of finishing a creel. So that's essentially what I'm doing here, is borrowing, if you like, the style that's more reminiscent of finishing a creel. So now, take these again. So one goes over, doesn't matter in which order. I'll probably do it this way, because that will allow me to pull the longer one. And I'll put a little bit of knee pressure on it and remove my marker. So that's the first warp. So we're forming the next warp. So I have twisted these, and just to show you, you could use something like putting a cable tie or a temporary tie of some sort with string, just to hold these things together so that they'll stay kind of like in a sugan or a roped shape. Okay, so again, it'll be a question of putting one over the other, intertwining them like that, and forming a warp. Okay, so in this case, I think I'll probably take this one over and that one under. It doesn't really matter which you do, but I usually take the longer one to pull. Okay, and if you find you have spare capacity left afterwards, as I have here, you could take this one and weave it in and back out like that, and even thread away. Now that this is finished with, you could even take a little piece of this again. See, I've done that with the previous one as well. If you thought there was a little piece that was worth it, you could even weave that little piece through there. Just, it'll make everything fairly secure. So it'll be a question of doing that. That's twice, 3 times and 4 times. And each time supplementing these rods so that you have a decent length. It doesn't matter so much at all with the ones that are going to weave across this, but the warp rods need to be fairly long so that they can comfortably do the task. Okay, so this is our fourth or last group of uprights to form the warp. And again, I've put a tie, a temporary tie on one side, just to show you, and a cable tie even on the other side. Both of these will be removed, but something that will hold the twist is a valuable thing, because if you don't do that, It could be string, it could be anything, but if they don't remain twirled together like that, this job will be a lot more difficult. So, and you can actually see here, I've chosen not to have too much foliage here, and it actually makes it a little bit clearer and easier to see. And if you're not happy with what you've managed in terms of tension, you can put your foot as well and pull a little bit more so that the base isn't too domed. So I think I'm reasonably happy with this, and our next task now will be to release these ties. These were temporarily keeping these rods out of the way, and we will begin to weave these in and out through these warp rods. But first of all, I'm going to release ties. If there's a bit of surplus stuff, I'll see if I can work it into spaces, and after that I'll be ready to knock these. Okay, so on this end, surplus warp, we have a few little pieces sticking out which we might be able to weave in. Just do one over. Okay, space is fairly tight, but you can reach in with your hand to accept it. And ideally, I'd prefer not to just put in, because I wouldn't feel that's enough grip. Anything that goes in should also come back out. And even though there's only a tiny little piece left on that, I still feel it's worth turning that, because that means that has been woven 3 times and is much less likely to unravel. Here's another little piece here. So again, we'll take that and weave it in and back out. And once you get one in and out with something, that's pretty good. Okay, now this particular opening weaver here, we will try to go over and under. I should have mentioned that I think in Michael O'Malley's pot, he may have had only 3 of these as opposed to 4, but I couldn't get the logic of that, because it's always easier to weave a base like this if it has an even number. So I allowed myself to have 4. So that's reasonably okay there. Now, if we haven't immediately a heather here, we could always put one in. But as it happens, we have something here. And again, I'll have to twirl that together in order to be able to weave it. But you can see I won't be supplementing these rods as much. I'm not as concerned about length. It was the warp rods that was really important to have them sufficiently long. So again, I'm hoping to be able to go in there, out here, with this. So in through there. And search for it here with your hand. And as much tension as you can, because that will make it a lot more rigid. And even if your weave is, say, agreeing at times, because I went over 2 there to get that first one. So I've come up here, but I'm still going to see if I can put that in there. There's a lot of foliage here, so I might thin it down a little bit and just try to retain a little bit of fibrous stuff to get in there. And again, I'll make a little rope of that little piece. Okay, so just at this moment, you see those 2 guys have fused together. So next time round, I'll see if I can separate them so that that one will be over, under, over, under. Okay, so next weaver we'll go through here. And now I'm going to see if I can separate these guys this time. And I definitely don't think I'd be able to do this without gloves because my hands aren't tough enough. I'd like to get that down a little bit more, but there's a very rough piece in it. So I think I'm unlikely to manage that. But I'm going to, this is a little bit short on its own, so I'm going to put a piece with it and work it and the new piece together to go over and under there. So we'll see how we get on with this piece. I might actually hook it in here as well, so that, and come out here so that it's very secure. And then see if we can feed that through there. And I have a little mat on the floor for this, just to protect the top of the pot a little bit. Okay, so next piece here, but this is very slight. So we'll certainly put a new piece in here and then go to weave. And we won't go too far with one side before we begin on the other side, and we leave the middle until last. And then I'll drill these two together so that they remain intact for this first piece. And in there, okay. So that one I didn't manage to get down as low as I'd like. So let's see how I'm fixed here. I'd like to thread that in under something. I might thread it in under there. I'm having to improvise a little bit because technically I should be over that, but and under the next, but I don't think I'll manage that. And one of the things I have learned from looking at the older pots is that they were perfectly happy to improvise if need be. Okay. So I'm going to do one more on this side and then I'm going to go to the other side. Even though the warp rods have been pushed down and I even stood on them, there is still always a little bit of a space between where these ones that weave over, under are engaging with the warp rods. So you can see I have a bit of a hole here. So it probably makes sense. I've already done it on this side, just done a little bit of paring to make that hole a little bit smaller. And now they should be able to cover the space easily enough. So similarly, I'm just going to do a little bit here. I probably will be pairing, I'll attempt, but if you didn't manage pairing, any in, out weave would do. So I'm going to go in here with one weaver and here with the other. it's easier to do this now than to have to do it later, because we have the space to weave at the moment. Now, it would probably be very difficult to thread a piece like that through here. We'll give it a go, but if it doesn't work, it's not a big problem because you can just weave the other way around. So that is helpful. And now I'll weave a little bit in this direction. So I'm kind of thinking it through here. I want to be under that, so that can piece in there. And I'll probably weave left-handedly here with the piece appearing. So that goes a long way towards sealing up those spaces, and now we should be able to do the warp on this side. So I clear the way a little bit so we can see what we're at. And hopefully manage to weave this over. I'll thread it just a little piece. And since this piece is quite long, again, it might suit to put some sort of a tie. I'm going to see if it'll hold without, but if you needed to, you could put a little temporary tie there to hold the string together, or the rope-like structure together. And if I can get it out there, that would be useful. Okay, so we've fairly well closed in there, except to knock these last two pieces. And I'm not too concerned if they will not thread through, because I can always just put replacement pieces of heather and just pull them through. Structurally, they're not needed. So here again. So I've worked these together, and I'm just going to put a little tie on the top. So I use this grey wire for a lot of jobs like this, and tie it very tightly, because I might use the wire itself to help me thread this through. Okay, so I want to do an over, under. An over 2 would do, but I'd prefer an over 1 if I can manage it. So I'll probably trim off what is too chunky there. So it doesn't obstruct it coming out. leave these two pieces because they might be useful and helpful. Okay. Okay, so those pieces are up, and now I'll see if I can put the wire itself through. And in that way, hopefully, ease this guy through. Now I have to make this space wide if I can. The wire tie is giving a bit there. Ah, yeah. This should do it. I'll poke that in there and maybe come across it with a piece of heather to secure it in place. So we're done with that. I have a little hole there, so we'll come with one piece of heather through there. So we'll feed a piece of heather. And this time now we don't have to be as worried about under one over one. We'll just pull through here and try to drive it through there. And I'll leave the green foliage piece because we don't need that. And work the thing through in there. And if I manage to hook it in and out, I'd prefer that. So I'm going to go for that and see if it'll work. And sometimes you have to be, of course, patient with this. And then once that's been secured like that, now there's no problem about driving it in. So I think that's reasonably okay there. There's still a small hole there, so I think I'll put one more, maybe in a different direction. And we still have this little hole to deal with here as well. And after that, I think we'll say we're good enough. So we'll deal with this space here. I might even get my finger in here, actually. And not quite. can't really see what's going on here, but I'm sure I'll find a place to come out. That's good. And if it'll work through again, so much the better, which it has. So that's it. One could still put your hand in there and trim anything that's excessive on the inside of the pot. But most of this stuff will wither away once it dries properly.